Okay, so this conversation is going to be about appreciative audiences. The idea of appreciative audiences really came from narrative practice. Michael White and his colleagues developed a way of helping people once again to consider their behaviour through the light or through the lens of the eyes of someone who loved them. Appreciative audiences can be people actually physically present in the counselling room or the interview room with the counsellor and the interviewee, or they can be something that is like a metaphor for the appreciative audience. I think in your text they describe using material like songs or writings or articles as a way of putting forth somebody's ideas and beliefs and getting feedback from others about them. Let's assume in an interview that you don't have someone easily available to come into the interview, but you want to bring in the idea of an appreciative audience. So I'm going to give an interview with myself because, at this time in the week I'm looking, there's no one here to interview apart from my cat. So here we go. Beth's interviewing Beth in a snapshot about how you can use appreciative audiences. And I'm going to do an interview about something that's, it's an issue in my life that doesn't cause me great grief, but is certainly part of my life, and that's the juggle. Finding a balance between work and life, and whether I want to or not. Okay, so Beth, wearing the interviewer hat, might say, so Beth, we've been speaking for some time about the juggle that you've been having around a work-life balance, as some people would say, and you've acknowledged that being a parent is something that you value highly, but you also are passionate about your work at the university, and that includes research as well as teaching. And in addition to the research and teaching, you're completing your PhD, which you have been for years, and it's your goal this year to finally submit. Yes? And you've spoken about the fact that you often feel like you're not doing so well at the juggle, and that there's always a ball that's dropped, unlike some people who you perceive manage to keep those balls in the air. Is that a fair summary? And Beth, the interviewee, might go, yes, Beth, that's a fair summary. Alright, so Beth, the interviewer, says to Beth, the interviewee, what I'd like to do is bring someone into the conversation that you really care about. Someone who you've experienced as a loving figure, perhaps a woman who's a mentor in your life, someone whose values you admire and look up to, someone whose advice you would listen to and pretty much take on board. Can you think of anyone who would fit that picture in your life? And I would probably say, I can actually. I can think of my grandmother. Her full name was Annie Elizabeth, but everyone called her Bess. And when my mum just called me Beth, it felt like a link between my gran and me from the moment Gran and I met. But, Gran died in 1992, and at the age of 91, and I still miss her every day and still talk to her every day. But she's someone that I really admire and respect. So Beth, the counsellor, might say, alright, well, let's just imagine for a moment that your Gran, you call her Gran? Yes, let's imagine Gran is sitting there right next to you. What do you think she would be doing sitting right next to you? How would she sit next to you in this environment? How does she sit? Is she someone who sits openly? Is she someone who's more tight? Can you show me what she'd do? And Beth might say, I loved my Gran's freedom of movement. So she was tiny in size, but generous and comfortable with herself and her size. And what she'd do is I reckon she'd reach over and grab my hand. She'd be holding my hand now. And she has this great giggle, which is the same chuckle as my dad. It's kind of like... I can hear it. I really hear it. So I'm imagining her sitting next to me going, oh, Beth. Okay. So as the counsellor, my next spot would probably be something along the lines of, I can really feel her presence here. That's a description that feels quite thick for me. Tell me, if you were to ask your gran about the way that you're juggling work and parenting and everything else, what do you think she would say to you? And I might say something like, well, Gran also had quite a bit of juggling to do. She was a piano teaching, and she gave birth to her first child in the midst of the Great Depression, and had 6 children. And my grandfather went away to the First World War and the Second World War, and though she didn't have children until after the First World War, they relied on Gran doing what was socially acceptable. So I suspect she would really get what it's like to try and work out how you manage the needs of children and the needs of work and a commitment to your partner. And of course, piano teaching, if music's your passion, you never stop learning, and you have to keep practicing to keep it up. So I would imagine that was a bit like her study too. And Beth the counsellor might reframe that a bit and say, so your gran, even though when she had a family, it was perhaps 90 years ago, there's some real similarities between her experiences. And her experience also was having children, juggling the need to be a provider, juggling the requirements of parenting, keeping up her own piano practice, all those things. How do you think she would respond if she was sitting here now and listening to the way you have described your own angst about the juggle? Then this is where Beth the client might say something like, the thing I remember about my gran is she's really warm and empathic and gentle, and kept her sense of humour. So I can imagine that Gran, who's holding my hand right now, I can imagine her chuckling and just saying, oh, Bethy. She and my dad were the only people that ever called me Bethy, but anyway, oh, Bethy, it is what it is. And yeah, it's a juggle, but as long as you know what the most important thing in your life is and you're making time for that, and that you're not doing anything that hurts anyone else, then that's okay. What else would she say? I think she would tell me to lighten up and not to take myself too seriously. That life's too short, and this particular point in time will be over like a flash. That sounds like she would have empathy rather than judgment for you, Beth. Is that what you think? Yeah, she's my gran, so that would be her direction, I guess. Empathy and kindness and support. Yeah, that's what I think. What other words of wisdom would she have for you, Beth? Gran was a great believer in discipline. So she was often telling me, I grew up and I was passionate about ballet, and I did ballet 7 days a week for years, for nearly 20 years in my life. And she would say that it's also about discipline. It's about knowing you have to do in the morning and doing what you have to do. So I guess that would be her other message about just doing it. Do what you have to do. Just doing what you have to do. So there's some compassion and empathy, but there's also that reminder that somewhere along the line discipline can help. So when you're thinking of Gran sitting there holding your hand and giving you those messages, is there anything you'd like to take away from this moment? Something that seems really special or important to you? Taking away to lighten up a bit, but not to lose sight of the discipline. That's what I take away. And to remember that she's holding my hand, and it's alright. It'll be alright. Lovely. So there you go. That's a kind of crazy two-personality example of how you might use the idea of appreciative audiences. I hope that helps a bit, and remember, we are going to be asking you to see if you can play around with that a bit in your second assessment task. Let's wait and see how it all goes. Alright, take care everyone. Bye-bye.